We'll get started.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I just would first like to welcome everyone for joining us. This has been a really fun and informative series of noontime chats that we've been doing Wednesdays at noon, talking about preservation. And today we're doing another with our preservation partners, highlighting the work of Connecticut Main Street. Okay, now that I want to advance it, it won't go. There it is. So for those of you who don't know us, Preservation Connecticut was established as the Connecticut Trust for Historic Preservation in 1975 by a special act of the Connecticut General Assembly. And we are the statewide nonprofit historic preservation organization. And we work in partnership with the State Historic Preservation Office and with all of our local preservation organizations around the state, large and small, including Connecticut Main Street. I'm Jane Montanaro, Executive Director of Preservation Connecticut. And on the call today, we have some of our circuit riders, Brad Scheid, Stacy Vero, and Mike Farino. And we highlight the circuit riders in this program because our circuit riders are our technical service staff who are typically out in the field. And during this time of COVID, our field visits have unfortunately been restricted, although our work seems to have not slowed down at all. But this format of having these conversations and inviting folks to just drop in and listen or bring up issues has been a way for us to feel like we're out in the field, virtually meeting with all of you around the state. So certainly send questions in during the chat or at the end of the presentation. We want to have a nice discussion, and also feel free to contact us with any questions or comments or issues that you're dealing with. We're here to help you with your preservation needs. Everyone could check to see that they're muted. Check a few people here. Okay. So as I said, these programs are helping us continue our mission. And our mission is to preserve, protect, and promote the buildings, sites, and landscapes that contribute to the vitality of Connecticut's communities. And we do that through a lot of educational programs such as this, and certainly with dialogue with all of our partners and with members of the community. So, and as I also said, this is for you to engage with us. So you're welcome to, sit back and enjoy the presentation, but don't be at all shy to raise any questions that you have for Preservation Connecticut or for Connecticut Main Street. So with that, I'll hand it over to our special guest today, Patrick McMahon, the CEO of Connecticut Main Street Center.
Thank you, Jane. It's great to be with you today. We're thrilled to have the opportunity to speak with your members about our mission at Connecticut Main Street Center and what we do across the state. Like Preservation Connecticut, we are a statewide nonprofit organization based in Hartford. We have 3 full-time staff and a part-time staff member, and we work with communities all across the state looking to drive more investment to the downtowns and help create vibrant locations where there's retail and commerce happening, and downtown housing, parks and open space and transit. All those different components come together. With me on this call today is also Lizzie Donius, who's the Executive Director of the Westfield Village Renaissance Alliance. I wanted to invite one of our local executive directors to be with me today so that you could get a sense of what one of our Main Street directors does on a day-to-day basis and how their role sort of intersects with historic preservation. We're actually celebrating our 25th anniversary this year, We were actually formed a division of CL&P in 1995, and then they rolled us off as a nonprofit in 1999. We've been supported ever since by Eversource, formerly CL&P. We wouldn't be able to do the work that we do if it wasn't for Eversource's contribution. We are part of a national network. We are the state coordinating program for it's called Main Street America, also known as the National Main Street Center. It was created by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. They created the National Main Street Center 40 years ago. So as we're celebrating 25 years, the national organization is celebrating 40 years. Next slide. So we're working with communities all across the state, 80 plus communities. We have in orange what are 13 professionally managed Main Street programs, and what that means is that they have some kind of full-time staff component. Many are downtown special services districts. So for instance, the Hartford Business Improvement District or the New Britain Downtown Special Services District. What happens there is there's an extra levy placed on the property owners. They pool that money, and the property owners then invest that in clean and safe activities. And there's usually a full-time director employed to do that work. We also have a number of nonprofit organizations like Westfield Village Renaissance Alliance, like Waterbury Main Street, like the Simsbury Main Street Partnership. And those organizations get funding from their municipalities, sponsorships, event registrations, fundraising, looking for grants, and that's how they fund their staff. In the blue, you will see organizations that or communities that are members of our network, but don't have full-time staff. Years ago, this was sort of a transition nationally to be a designated Main Street program. You have to have full-time staff. We realized in Connecticut that not every community was going to have that full-time staff component, yet we have these historic downtowns, and we still want to be able to provide these community services. So in the blue are the ones that on an annual basis are members of Connecticut Main Street. And in the gray, we have a couple of regional members, essentially areas of the community where they're very small communities with smaller populations, and it makes sense to do it in a regional basis. Each of the communities provide us an annual membership fee, and it's all based on what their population is. Next. So we work in communities that are rural. For instance, Coventry would have a village that they're working on. We work in a number of suburban communities, the inner ring suburbs, the second ring suburbs that have those classic downtowns, as well as either urban downtowns or neighborhood commercial districts. An example of a neighborhood commercial district in Hartford would be Upper Albany Main Street Center. They are actually sponsored in large part by the University of Hartford. So all the work that's happening on Upper Albany Main Street wouldn't be able to go forward without that really close partnership with the University of Hartford. The picture that shows the urban setting, that is downtown Waterbury. And in Waterbury, they've struck a new sort of ongoing partnership. The new president is from Post University of Main Street Waterbury. So that again shows that kind of connection between higher education and some of our programs. Next slide. So what do we do? It's much like Preservation Connecticut. We have a big educational and training component, having any kind of number of topics, whether it's on transportation, historic preservation, small business development. We have networking opportunities. We like to at least twice a year go to visit downtown, meet up with local officials, let them explain what their initiatives are downtown. And then we have some social time after. We do those in partnership with the Connecticut Economic Development Association. We were intending this fall to be going to downtown New Milford as well as Coventry. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we've halted all sort of in-person activities, and hopefully we can resume those in the new year. But those are really a great opportunity for the different folks that are participating locally. And who are those people participating locally? That would be the Main Street program board members, their executive directors. It could be the CEOs of the community, town planners, the economic developers, economic development commissions, planning commission members. They're the ones who are usually at our events. I spent 20 years in local economic development in Windsor, Windsor-Loxton, and Suffield. And I realized that, it's not just working with communities. We have to be broader than just working with the municipalities, because these projects in economic and community development don't happen without the private sector. So we've made a real concerted effort to reach out to architects and engineers and developers and financial institutions, banks, all the different state agencies to really kind of have a broad coalition to move some of these things forward. We're involved in advocacy and public policy efforts. In 2015, we worked with the economic developers, the Connecticut Association of Planners, Yale Law Clinic, and Pullman and Comley to get municipal tax increment financing legislation passed. We've also been very involved with the Coalition to Preserve the Community Investment Act, and I know that's a very big topic for Preservation Connecticut and our other historic preservation partners. So we're at the table trying to preserve that important historic preservation funding. We have a very robust communications program. We are on all of different social media platforms, so please tune in. We try to highlight success stories and important projects and programs that are happening, financial tools that are available, new grant announcements, RFPs on important projects, all that type of thing. So that's kind of a quick snapshot of some of the things that we do. Next. So this is the Main Street approach that was created by the National Main Street Center 40 years ago. And essentially, it says that if you take these 4 steps, you're going to have a more dynamic, vibrant downtown. And the first one there is economic vitality, restoring economic value. So those are, do you know what your trade area is, what the market analysis is, can you draw what types of retail or other commercial downtown? Is your downtown fit for housing? As well as on important projects, those vacant or underutilized buildings that all of our communities have, is what are the tools that are available to make those projects doable and feasible? We look at design. How does is it walkable? Is it walkable? Can you know exactly where the parking is? Is there wayfinding signage? The elevations of the building, are they right up on the sidewalk, or are they set back after the whole suburbanization of America? We're trying to make it so that these areas are more walkable and bikeable and transit centered. Third is promotion, restoring social value, and that is trying to get people downtown through special events, through other promotions and sales to drive sales to the local retailers as well as the local independent restaurants. And then organization, which I think is really almost the most important for the localities, is you have to have some organization or people that are going to drive the bus, that are on a day-to-day basis, sort of shepherding and stewarding their downtown. Again, whether that's a downtown special services district, a nonprofit organization, town staff, someone has to have the responsibility to maintain and improve and grow their downtown. Next. We call this the height of revitalization, or THOR. And these are all the different topics that we'll highlight during the course of a year in our training and in our marketing. You can see right up the top there for the sense of place, historic preservation and placemaking, the arts and fun events take really top billing. We look at downtowns as just ecosystems, and we need to have all of these things working together to make them as vital as possible. Next. I think your audience would be very pleased to hear that our whole methodology is about utilizing preservation and place-based economic development strategies. We truly do believe that historic preservation is economic development. You know, some people feel that historic preservation could be a roadblock to new development. No, we see it as being really critical to setting the character and drawing more people to the downtowns and help drive the local economy. Next. So these are just, I travel all over the state. I've probably been able to visit about 120 of the 169 communities. I take pictures everywhere I go, and I think that, you know, this is just a snapshot of about 9 different communities, and it's really the rich mosaic of historic structures that we have in our communities, our town halls, the churches, our libraries, our multi-story mixed use buildings, our historic theaters like the Warner that you'll see down in one of the corners. You know, these are just absolutely gorgeous, beautiful buildings that really, I think, set the tone and the character of a lot of these communities. I think it really adds to the charm of Connecticut and what makes Connecticut special. When I'm traveling around the state, I try to get a photo of the blue historic signs. I think those are a really great placemaking aspect in Connecticut. And so I think all of you speaking to the choir, you know, just looking at these buildings, can you imagine if more of these get knocked down and get replaced by sort of vanilla new construction? It'd be kind of sad. Next. So, you know, I really wanted to highlight the fact that we have hundreds, if not thousands, of vacant or underutilized older and historic buildings. We held a statewide summit on this very topic last year in 2 locations, at the Lyceum in Hartford and at the Wall Street Theater in Norwalk. Thanks to Todd Bryant. He was very helpful in getting us going with this. We had James Lindbergh from the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the Green Lab, talking about the importance from a green environmental preservation standpoint, how important these historic buildings are. These historic buildings have encapsulated energy into them. It took materials, it took labor to put these together. And it's a far better approach, especially if they're still structurally sound and they've got this historic character, that we find ways to renovate them, bring them back into service, getting them so that they're generating more tax revenue for the communities. So this is definitely a theme that we're pitching really hard, and we know that Preservation Connecticut, I'm constantly referring folks to Preservation Connecticut and your incredible circuit rider program, because we, you know, and just in my mind, we need to move these projects forward faster than they currently are. We need to find ways to get more investment and use all the tools available. I will tell you that James Lindbergh, who was our keynote speaker at the Adaptive Reuse, we are going to have Jim present at the Connecticut Preservation Action which is the state lobbying organization for historic preservation, at our annual meeting, date to be determined sometime in September. Next. I'm just going to go through just a few different tools that are available that can help move projects forward. We looked at, in our historic downtowns, we had these multi-story mixed-use buildings that may have had some activity in the first floor, some retail, maybe a restaurant, but the upper stories were sitting there vacant and underutilized. So we tried to move forward a program in which some of those upper stories could be converted to residential housing. We believe that if you have feet on the street, that you have more of that downtown housing, you've got spending power for people that are living there, who are then going to go down and spend their money at the local retailers and restaurants. This was a program in partnership with the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, as well as SHPO has been very involved with us on this. We've been able to, we did a pilot program in eight communities, so I'll show a couple of the success stories in the next slides. Next. This is the Brown Building in downtown Waterbury. The upper stories were converted to housing that were utilized for student housing for the downtown UConn campus. Beautiful building, as you can see. Obviously wasn't doing any good having those upper stories just sitting there vacant. So we had Cross-Key Architects and also economic impact firm look at the different pro formas to make that project go forward. And thankfully today that is a renovated building that's adding value to downtown Waterbury. Next. This is 99 West Street in New Britain. It's just a couple of buildings down from City Hall. It's a short walk to the Connecticut Fast Track busway that goes from New Britain to Hartford. We had at the time Commissioner Rediker from DOT at the ribbon cutting, because he thought it was really important that there would be these housing units in close proximity to transit, because it would drive transit numbers and help keep that the Hartford line and the busway and that type of thing more economically feasible for the state. So we're continuing to look at these multi-story mixed-use buildings. If you have anything like this in your community that is vacant, please let us know, and we'll see if there's a way for us to help. We do have thanks to CHFA, $1 million revolving loan program. We have about $500,000 available right now. That one of the biggest uses we've had so far by developers is a $50,000 pre-development loan, so that they can do some architectural, some structural, some environmental studies, permitting, legal work to even determine the feasibility of the project. Next. I mentioned tax increment financing earlier. It's a really great new tool. 10 communities have established TIF districts, most of them in their downtowns. This photo is of the Montgomery Mill building in downtown Windsor Locks. Sat there vacant for over 10 years. All the windows were bashed in. Residents were starting to say, why don't you just knock this thing down, turn it into a riverside park. Thankfully, Beacon Communities out of Massachusetts came in and has converted it to 160 units of mixed income. And they used every possible program available to them, low-income housing tax credits, so state and federal historic tax credits, brownfields funding, TIF revenue to make this happen. And that's what we need to do. My predecessor, Connecticut Main Street, John Simone, called it lasagna financing, which is so all those different layers of financing that go into a major project like this. Next. This resource through Preservation Connecticut has just been outstanding. The Connecticut Mills Making Places website. I'm referring people constantly to this. In fact, I was on a call with the owners of the Hotchkiss Brothers Mill in downtown Torrington. It's been vacant for quite some time, and they're looking to do housing and a mixed-use component. And in introducing the owner to various parties across the state, I used the inventory link to the property to help everybody understand what the property was, so that they could start the conversation with some knowledge of that property. So thank you, Preservation Connecticut. And I think we have to thank SHPO. I believe SHPO provided a lot of the funding to make this happen. What Renee and her cohorts were able to do, so important. And we have a lot more mills that still need to be renovated. So kudos to Preservation Connecticut on making this happen. Next. Next. All right, well, Jane's trying to, okay. This is downtown Meriden, and pointing out transit-oriented development. And I'm not certain everybody thinks of transit-oriented development as a historic preservation subject, but I think it is. Again, like New Britain with the fast track, downtown Meriden now has a stop on the Harvard line. It has created many new housing units, but they have the fabric of an historic downtown with many multi-story mixed-use buildings that need investment, and having that transit stop right there, we're hoping will help move forward with the renovation and restoration of more buildings in downtown Meriden. And we have examples like that around each of the transit stops across the state. Next. So last year, the state legislature passed a couple really important bills, land banking as well as receiverships. The receiverships is if you have a vacant building, the property owner isn't doing anything about it, they're not marketing it, you potentially can go to court and try to get a receiver appointed who can help move the project forward. The bill only went part of the way because they had a minimum number of residents in a community that before it would qualify. So a lot of our smaller and suburban communities actually don't qualify for the receivership program. So that is a tweak that we want to go back to the legislature and get them to amend that and make it so that any community can move forward with receivership. Again, I just point these out because we need absolutely every tool in the toolbox to move some of these projects forward. Next. I'm sure most folks have heard of opportunity zones at this point. There's 72 opportunity zones in 27 different communities. And the one thing I will point out is it is a focus area for the state and the Department of Economic and Community Development. And because of that, SHPO has added an extra 5% state historic tax credit for projects that are within these opportunity zones. There hasn't been a tremendous amount of activity in Connecticut yet in the OZs, but hopefully that will change in the next couple of years. Next. So last year, working with CT Next, we held a workshop on small scale development. I point this out because, a lot of the major developers, they need 150 plus housing units before they're even interested in a project. We need more small scale developers. So we did a training program. We hope to continue to focus in on this. We need to help people locally who have interest in their communities, who want to take an opportunity to fix up smaller historic and older buildings, learn the tools of the trade, what the zoning is required, how they interface with the municipalities, where they can find the financing. So if you know of small scale developers, let us know. I think we all need to have a really good database of that to encourage more of our smaller buildings getting restored. Next. A lot of our historic downtowns, the neighborhoods that surround those main streets are these older historic homes. We have aging housing stock. Much of our housing stock was built before World War II. A lot of it in the 1880s, 1890s. Those 2, 3, 4 family units that you'll see in a lot of communities, and they're just not getting the reinvestment that is required. Some community development block grant money goes into housing rehabilitation programs, but we've got to find ways to identify some additional funding streams to improve these type of buildings. There is a bill, this HR 3316, in front of Congress today. Actually, a Connecticut woman, Carrie Shea, is the one who's kind of spearheading that. So take a look and be a voice, because it would be a shame, like if this beautiful brick building that is pictured in this slide, if that starts to decay and doesn't get it reinvestment in, we're going to have trouble in our older neighborhoods. Next. I mentioned that historic preservation is economic development. I don't know how many people on the Zoom session are familiar with Donovan Ripkema from Place Economics. They've done plenty of studies that highlight the fact that historic preservation results in construction jobs. It results in permanent jobs for both the businesses that locate in those buildings. Sort of the multiplier effect when a historic building is completed, and how that impacts the downtown, really critical. So check out the work of Donovan Ripkema. I know that years ago they did a study of the state historic tax credit program and the multiplier effect for that. I think we all, as champions of historic preservation, have to say that it is about economic development. It's about jobs. It's about creating value in our communities. And I'd be curious to hear from people on the call as to whether or not you feel that there's enough tradespeople. I think that our older building stock, there's just so much of it. I think that in order to get it all restored, we're going to need to train more folks in the trades, plumbers and electricians and those other specialty skills. But again, love to hear from the participants on that particular item. Next. So I know we want to get to some answers. I'm just going to really quickly mention that we've kind of transitioned our educational programming for the next few months to recovery and resilience. COVID has had just a dramatic impact on our downtowns. The shutdown of our downtown businesses, the restaurants and the retailers for that periods of time. Just a big blow to so many of the businesses. There is potentially an avalanche in front of us of small business closures. Many of the small businesses have 2 or 3 months of liquidity, of money in the bank, and if we're not able to bring more people out to be patrons in a safe manner, wearing your mask and the social distancing and all of those important aspects to it, but the small businesses still need the support. The federal relief so far has been incredibly important. The PPP, however, it's been insufficient. A lot of the smaller businesses did not access PPP because they didn't have bank relationships, etc. I'm hoping that some additional federal relief will be forthcoming. They're debating another bill right now in Congress. I will let you know that Main Street America has put in a $100 million request to help our Main Street programs across the state. We're working with Senator Murphy and Senator Blumenthal to hope to move that proposal forward in the next relief bill, so stay tuned on that. Major landlord-tenant issues. If the tenant doesn't have income coming in, they want to negotiate their lease with their landlord. The landlords are concerned because they have mortgages to pay, so it really is multiplier effect to this, and it's going to be we all have to be working together and finding ways to help these small businesses. As I mentioned, potentially significant new vacancies, hits to our state municipal budgets. But there also have been opportunities for creativity. Those pictures that are here show downtown Norwich, where they just closed down lanes of traffic or parking stalls so that they could have outside dining areas. So I applaud all of the communities that have taken those steps. E-commerce is going to be really critical if we can't have people going into the bricks and mortar as much. A lifeline could be e-commerce. A study of the Main Street America said that 63% of small businesses had no online presence. 63%. It seems incredible. So we have actually put up a library of videos on our website. 4 of them are about the process of setting up your website and other e-commerce topics like payment and how do you deliver the goods to the customers. On a positive note, I can tell you that I'm still getting calls from developers that are interested, that are already working on a specific project or looking for new opportunities. I'm assuming that developers are going to see a potentially depressed real estate as a time to kind of swoop in. So potentially more projects could move forward even in the pandemic. I'm also very concerned about organizational funding, especially for our nonprofit Main Streets. So we are working to try to find ways to help the local entities. Next. So I mentioned Eversource. I also want to mention DECD, the State Historic Preservation Office, and also UI. Couldn't do the work that we do without their support, and we thank them. Next. So if you want to learn more about Connecticut Main Street, please visit our website. The address is on this slide. We have plenty of online resources that you can tap into. Feel free to contact myself and my staff with any questions that you have. And with that, I'll take some questions, but I also want to make sure that Lizzie gets an opportunity to just kind of explain the day in the life of a local Main Street executive director.
Thanks, Patrick. So being on the ground Main Street director is a crazy job. I love hearing Patrick go through the overview of what Connecticut Main Street does, because those are really the guiding principles that we use in our daily work in Westville. Westville is a small commercial district. It's only a handful of blocks big, and it is in a big city, New Haven, or a big city in Connecticut. But we face all the same issues that smaller town Main Streets face in terms of being concerned about empty storefronts and just the economic health of a Main Street commercial district. We face a lot of the same issues. So the way we intersect with preservation, I've worked with Jane on a specific building in Westville, doing a structural needs assessment for our Lyric Hall Theater, a building we're very invested in keeping healthy and alive. But Westville is a historic district. The full commercial district is a historic district. So we work, the main piece of our work, and even more so now with COVID, is keeping those storefronts healthy and active, and keeping those second floors also, as Patrick was talking about. We do have a lot of housing in Westville already on the second floors and the third floors of our buildings. Some of it that was developed as specifically through a program called Arlo by Thea Buxbaum maybe 20 years ago. So we have artist housing in Westville, helps define our neighborhood and the arts component of what we do in Westville. We work also to make sure that there's investment in those buildings. Both the new developers that we're seeing that we're excited about, but also in the individual businesses through our retail reinvestment grants that we make, which are kind of small but are often matches for programs through the city. So we're looking to make sure that money is going in to keep those buildings healthy. And then we recently, in the last few years, did a zoning change with the Yale Economic and Community Development group to just look at our zoning. We lost a very, very important anchor historic building in Westfield that held our restaurant, Delaney's, which was our neighborhood hangout for everyone. And had apartments above it. And Anika Lamar was the lawyer that we worked with the Yale Clinic, put it best when she said, you know, think about the buildings in your community that you couldn't live without, and what would happen if you lost them? Could you recreate those buildings? And the answer, like Delaney's is a great example of this, we could not in our zoning recreate the building that had played such an important role in our community because of restrictions on how many parking spaces you needed, and other issues related to that. We would have needed a much larger building and a lot more parking on that space. So we worked, that was one of the driving forces behind us rewriting the zoning code. This predates my directorship. My predecessor, Chris Heitman, began that process, and then we were able to finish it to really encourage more biking, walking, scale the buildings, and the growth in Westfield, which we are seeing, and please, we're hoping is going to continue even after this horrible coronavirus, but to scale that growth so that it fits in with what is already in Westville and the neighborhood feel. Like we have, it is a historic district full of historic buildings that all look very different from each other. We don't have a prevailing aesthetic, but we do have a size and a charm all our own, and we want to make sure that as we add units, mixed use development, and have some of these new, we have a new restaurant in our bank building, so exciting, as this stuff comes in, that it fits in with the neighborhood, and that it encourages those things that are in a way a look back to that walkable, you know, dense streets, you know, healthy economic environment that we're looking to create and sustain.
Great. Thank you, Lizzie. And thank you, Patrick. Great presentation and a wonderful overview of all of the work that you do. I know in preservation, we like to talk about being stewards of historic buildings, and certainly when you visit these Main Street areas, you can tell that there are stewards of these historic buildings through the work that you do in helping the business owners and just helping with economic development and increasing business activity and investment in those areas. I mean, you're being stewards of those districts as well, and it really does show. And it really does take that lasagna of financing and lasagna of organizations and locals and partners to pull it all off. So we are so grateful to both of you for the work that you do and supporting our goal of preservation in Connecticut. So with that, I'll start with a couple of questions. There were some submitted in advance. Can you talk a little more specifically about what CDBG programs are, what's invested in Main Street through that program?
So for the folks who may not be familiar, CDBG is Community Development Block Grant money. It is a program through the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And what happens is smaller communities have to apply directly to the state of Connecticut under the Small Cities CDBG program for grants. Entitlement communities get an automatic allocation on a formula basis. For the Small Cities program here in Connecticut, most of the money has been devoted to housing rehabilitation programs, most recently devoted to public housing, so housing authority properties that need to be renovated, that are dated. So a lot of the funding's already sort of allocated to those aspects of it. The larger communities, it runs the gamut of how they're utilizing it in Hartford and New Haven and in the other larger spaces. Some of the money goes to public services, to various nonprofit organizations and the work that they do. It has to have a low and moderate income basis to it. I'm really not all that familiar with how much of the CDBG funding actually really gets incorporated into historic buildings themselves. There's probably a study out there somewhere relative to that. But I will tell you one thing, that the CDBG funding is only, it just scratches the surface of the need when it comes to housing rehabilitation, that slide I showed earlier. There's so much more housing units that need investment that currently the CDBG allocations just isn't sufficient to cover.
And there was someone that also posed a question about if they're interested in forming a Main Street program in their community. Is that, how does that go about? Is there a nonprofit sponsoring organization or the municipality, or is that a separate entity?
Yeah, it's sort of blossomed in many different ways in different communities. It's usually, you know, some active residents see that their downtown Main Street or commercial district isn't going as well as it should be. They start to talk with other stakeholders on this topic and go to the community and start conversations relative to that. At times, a separate nonprofit organization will be established, which can be really helpful. You know, Todd's on the line here, and there's a nonprofit organization that is currently servicing the Wall Street, Main Street, and West Avenue area of his community. And they'll often come to Connecticut Main Street Center for some technical assistance on how they can establish their nonprofit or improve their nonprofit. Whether that is, you know, how do they deal with creating a board, bylaws, fundraising aspects. So those are the different ways. Does any singular sponsor need to be present? Not necessarily, but it certainly helps. As I mentioned, Upper Albany Main Street, that tie into University of Hartford's been incredibly important. I would say that most of the nonprofits do rely on some portion of town funding. So if you want to do a local nonprofit, you often need to have some buy-in from the community for a portion of the annual budget to make it really functioning.
Great, thank you. Well, we certainly would like to hear from everyone who's joined us. If you have a question and you'd like to unmute yourself, raise your hand, or send something. Todd Bryant, I see your hand. Go ahead, and you can send a question through the chat if you'd like. Go ahead, Todd.
I'm going to unmute. There we go. I wanted to ask Lizzie, what happened to the building that you lost?
It was a fire. It was a fire, and it was an old building, and it just went like the whole thing. So.
Oh, that's too bad. I mean, I was hoping that it would. I mean, I was just wondering if it was a developer or it was a city issue or a zoning issue or anything like that. But a fire, there's not much you can do. Can't lobby against flames.
Yeah. We do have a building now that I did write down when Patrick was talking about receivership that I might have to look into that, but that's a different building.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we didn't lose a building, but we lost a really important business just because the space was sold out from under them.
Mm,
Fat Cat.
yeah.
Lizzie had mentioned earlier the Lyric Theater. And since Todd is also on the Zoom, they have an historic theater in their downtown, the Wall Street Theater.
Right.
These are economic development drivers for our downtowns, and they've been close, and they have really no opportunity to open anytime soon. So like the Bushnell, Guard Arts in New London, the Palace in Waterbury, Palace in Stamford, they're all banding together and requesting funding through the state, as well as approaching the federal government for funds. It's precarious times for those. They have carrying costs, big buildings, they still have bills to pay. So as preservationists across the state, if you could weigh in on supporting those historic theaters, I think it would come in very handy.
I know that there's a couple, they're trying to do some things. They have a film series, and they're looking at things, they're actually looking at shows out in the fall. And I know that Ridgefield, the Ridgefield Playhouse is actually starting to do things outside. They're having concerts at the park there. So some of these theaters are doing the best they can. But like you say, it's a huge blow. I mean, it took us 10 years to finally get that place back alive again, and then this.
We've got a quick. Ed Gerber, you're raising your hand?
Yeah, thanks, Nate. Hey, could I ask Todd a question?
Sure.
Todd? Oh, Todd. Where are you?
Right next to me up here.
Where are you?
We've been doing some work on the basement.
Oh, good Lord.
It's Dubrovnik. It's a building in Dubrovnik.
Oh. Well, and also could I ask, Patrick, could you go back to the first, I guess one of the earlier slides that showed the whole state and which communities had Main Street projects?
I have to share that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's
Jane.
okay. It's not a problem.
This is the most important slide. Oh,
Map? Oh, sorry.
yeah.
Well, while Jane is looking for the slide, I saw in the chat there was a question about whether or not we would have another small-scale developer workshop. Certainly, I think that another one is needed and worthy. I will say that there's an organization in Bridgeport called Led by Us that are doing small-scale developer workshops locally in Bridgeport, and it'd be great to do something similar in New Haven and in Hartford and throughout the state. So your question on this map?
So I'm looking. I live in southern Connecticut, and the orange town, is that Bridgeport?
That is Bridgeport, yes.
Okay, and then Fairfield has a no staff project.
Right. We work directly with their economic developer, Mark Barnhart.
I see. And then Westport has nothing, and then Norwalk. Okay, I just wanted to get that straight. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, as you can see, I would certainly love to, increase our coverage in Southwest Connecticut. I've met up with several of the communities. I've been in Greenwich and in Stamford and in other locations. So, we'll just keep plugging along.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from the group? I don't see everybody at the moment. Go ahead and unmute yourself if you have a question. I don't see everyone right now.
So there's another question here in the chat about through Preservation Connecticut or Connecticut Main Street, directly engage in attracting young entrepreneurs, developers, startups to Connecticut? Can we match up the properties in need and ideally tackle multiple goals simultaneously? Thank you. You just basically encapsulated why we had that small scale developer workshop. And that is why CT Next. CT Next is a state quasi-public agency that's devoted to entrepreneurs and startups. Kip from CT Next felt that if we could get entrepreneurs to potentially acquire these smaller buildings and fix them up, potentially have some additional space they could lease out to others, that they would actually make it so that their business plan would work out better than if they were basically renting and having a portion of their revenue go into another party instead of staying with them as a business. So that was the purpose of it. And I think there's definitely a need to continue that. I'll toss out a couple of things that you might be interested in taking a look at. There's something called Mainvest. It's equity crowdfunding, where folks can actually crowdfund revenue to help small businesses get established in downtown locations. There's also a real estate angle. There's some, I'm trying to remember the exact website address, but it's for small scale development where you can invest in these smaller properties and not be an institutional investor. You can be, someone making $60,000, $70,000, $80,000. You want to try to get some passive income. You go check out these development opportunities online, and you can potentially invest directly online. So we have to look at these new creative tools that will bring in more money into historic preservation. One of the challenges is, our banks in Connecticut do a great job, invest heavily across the state, but they're less likely to invest in startups and the entrepreneurs, and less likely to, if you're a small scale developer and you have no track record of doing these things, to try to go to a federally insured bank to get financing could be more difficult. So we need other streams. I'll point folks on the call to community development financial institutions. Hopefully people are familiar with CDFIs. There's a few of them across the state. Capital for Change, based in New Haven, and the Hartford Community Loan Fund in Hartford. They potentially can do projects with some financing that is less strict than the standard bank financing. So if you run into some of those challenges on the smaller projects, think about approaching CDFIs.
And in Patrick's presentation, he very graciously mentioned Preservation Connecticut's Mills website, our Making Places website, and that program that was funded by the State Historic Preservation Office to survey all of the mills in Connecticut has really continued on with Preservation Connecticut. We have Renee Trubert, who still is fielding calls and inquiries routinely. And she's a one-woman show and trying to match developers with sites that they're interested in and building a network, building relationships with the municipalities and other partners. So in our office, we do what we can to facilitate those relationships as well.
How can we encourage more champions of historic preservation across the state? Thoughts? Especially young people.
Yes.
and not just young. I think we need to find ways to have a more diverse population interested in historic preservation.
Yeah, I think, sorry, I'm going to jump in here, but I think that's a really key thing. And, you know, with everything that's going on now, it's been really highlighted. And I think maybe one way to do that is for the local nonprofits, preservation nonprofits and historical societies to sort of take up that challenge. And because we're the ones that are right on, I mean, you know, and I'm talking to myself here, you know, because we're the ones that are on the ground, and we're the ones that are dealing with people on a regular basis and on a really, you know, granular level. So, I mean, I think that's really what's going to happen is for the, and I see Diane Gillarette is on here too, so from the Norwalk Historical Society. So all of us are kind of charged with doing that, because you can't do it. You can't do that as a statewide because you're not working in the trenches like we are. So it's really up to us, I think.
It's up to us to engage with the folks that don't even consider themselves preservationists. They don't even see that as what they're doing, but yet they're the stewards and the users and, you know,
Exactly.
using our historic properties. So we need to be able to connect with them and bring the resources that we have to bring to bear to their projects.
So the hard part for me is, how do you identify those? How do you get in front of them to, you know, with the information that might, you know, make the light go off? How do you do that? Anybody know?
Got to be.
Any ideas?
You've got to be really on the ground. You've got to know everybody.
Right. But I mean, but I'm asking for help here.
Yeah.
I'm Gwen Bruno. I'm with Wyndham Preservation Inc. And, you know, we talked about this at board meetings. We really are fighting, I don't want to say fighting, but, you know, today's mantra is new is better, old is equated with not functional for the modern family. And I find when I'm talking about preservation to people who may not consider themselves preservationists, I talk about, I try to find some common ground. And what I find sometimes hits home with people who are really on the fence is the impact to landfills. I searched online. I found a FEMA brochure of how they calculate debris going into landfills. And generally, I mean, that's due to you know, storms and, you know, acts of God. But you can use the formula to calculate. You can usually determine from public sources the size, you know, and the specifics, the measurements of the building that you would need to plug into this. And you know, I find what sometimes resonates with people is, this is how many tons of debris is going into the landfill if we demolish the structure instead of rehabilitate it.
Good one.
Yep, that's a great point.
Yeah,
So we are, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Jay. I was just going to mention that there is a publication that Jim Lindbergh and the Green Lab at the National Trust did on why reutilization of buildings is important. It's not just from an economic standpoint, but the environmental aspect of it. So maybe that's one of the sources that we could make sure everybody on the call gets a copy of.
That's a good. I think that's also a good way to open a conversation to a group of people that maybe, like you say, didn't think they were preservationists. Does anybody, I have one more question for everybody, is, does anyone here, we have a pretty good sized community college here in Norwalk, and that I've always wanted to engage in some way, and I think that's another way that we might be able to do something like we're talking about. Does anybody work with a local college of some kind, and if so, how do you do it? Well, it's worth a try.
Well, again, I'll just mention the Upper Albany Main Street and their tie-in with the University of Hartford. They have their business students help the local small businesses with some challenge, whether that's writing a new business plan, or some other aspect of marketing. And again, if we can strengthen those small businesses who are investing in the, rent in those buildings, it helps us from an historic preservation standpoint.
Yeah, I was going to say we are very close to Southern Connecticut State University, so we work with them in a number of ways over the years, and we try and make sure to have representation from Southern on our board, and at different places in the university as well. And I would just say, as a Main Street program, we've had to do, we also do a lot of events. That's something I wouldn't usually talk about in this context, but I would say that kind of active recruitment of having people involved in those events and in the organization has allowed us to really diversify our board and our staff and our organization at many different levels, and that's allowed it to be more relevant to a lot of different populations. So we do have a very diverse group of people who are involved in WIVRA, and a lot of them are young. So but that was an active process of engaging the community at a lot of different levels, and going out and finding people and forcing them to work with us and be involved in our stuff. So, and now they define it. They help us define it. So
that's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Lizzie. That's a great model.
Has anyone developed curriculum to go into the schools and talk about historic preservation?
We have not developed curriculum. We get invited from time to time, and we attend, and it's usually a very focused ask that we've been asked to present, and it's been from second grade to college that we've presented at.
Thank you.
Well, we are past our, oh, go ahead, Susan.
No, I would add that we do a third grade program with the New London Public Schools, and before COVID, across the year, we would bring the classes. I guess there are 12 third grade classes in the public schools, and we bring them 2 at a time to visit the local historic sites. And we always talk about preservation, about the history of the site. Particularly, I'm with the Custom House, about how the citizens saved it, and we talk about the lighthouses, how they own the lighthouses. Because they're citizens, and how the students all have ownership as members, as free members to the Custom House. And I think all of that is something we try to reinforce when we go to the different sites. They're third graders, so I'm not quite sure how much they take in, but we try to talk about it.
Okay.
Sure, they take in a lot. Everyone remembers their field trips from elementary school.
Yeah, we're a fairly new nonprofit, so we've got a lot of irons in different buyers, but that subject's been brought up, and we do have retired teachers on the board, and it's something that I would like to work on, although I have no background in education. I have one question. When does, I guess we're probably a special circumstance, but when would Connecticut Main Street get involved for the potential development of a new community, or a new downtown? And I'll explain that. I live in Wyndham Center, and our organization is in the process of acquiring the Wyndham Inn from the inn's owners. They're going to donate it to us. And in the last century, last 2 centuries, Wyndham Center has been a commercial hub. It really isn't a commercial hub anymore. We have a library that is so small it doesn't have room. And we have a small post office and a Victorian cottage. And there's been a lot of interest in the residents as to what the inn will be repurposed as. And we are going to go after a feasibility study. But a lot of people have expressed interest in some sort of coffee shop, light retail, nothing that would spoil the aesthetic of the town. And I'm just wondering if we should discuss this with Connecticut Main Street, and when is too early, or when would be a good time to talk about the possibilities?
Anytime's a good time to talk about possibilities. We have to do some dreaming, right?
Yes.
So hopefully you've had an opportunity to reach out to your town planner and your local economic developer, Jim, to sort of start those conversations. It really comes down to what the context of your village is, and what are the buildings and how they interrelate with each other. So without really having more information, it's hard to respond directly, but feel free to give us a call.
I will. Thank you.
So we're going to take the next couple of weeks off. We're going to take the month of August off from our noontime chats, but we'll reconvene in September. And one of the programs that we'll be bringing to you in September is to discuss the rehab of the Montgomery Mill. So we don't have a date yet, but that is on the docket. So be sure to tune in so you can get the full story of what Patrick was alluding to with the lasagna of financing and everything that was involved there. And I want to thank you all for joining us today, and Patrick and Lizzie and everyone. And please be sure to be a member of Preservation Connecticut and support Connecticut Main Street as well, so we can have our boots on the ground and everyone working together to engage those developers and people who don't know that they're preservationists in helping support the preservation of our beautiful state. So thank you all for joining us, and we will send out the slide deck to everyone that attended, and there are resources attached to the slide deck as well.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.